Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest issue of Think Global China edition. And in today's session we're going to talk about branding and the 8 steps to successfully build your brand in China. My name's David Thomas and I'm joined by 2 fellow China experts, Greg Mickelson and Scott Bouvier. Welcome guys.
Great to see you, David. Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Now, in today's session, we're going to go through a few things again. We're going to look at a quick recap of the China opportunity for small business owners, and then we're going to get into some specifics around the fastest and most effective way to gather up-to-date market insights. We're going to look at the mindset and aspirations of the Chinese consumer. We're going to look at choosing business names and making sure that they're available. We're particularly going to talk about trademarking and protection of your name and brand and IP in China. We're going to look at the best way to communicate value to Chinese consumers. We're going to look at how you create a brand story which will grab attention, how to decide between social media and a physical presence. And then finally, we're also going to look at how you can monitor the value of your brand so you know that it's working. So let's get started, and I think that the starting point we all need to know is what's the most effective and fastest way of gathering up-to-date market insights on China. So let's start with you, Greg. How would we go about doing that?
Look, I think probably the best way and the fastest way to get it will be to go to China and experience firsthand for yourself the Chinese market and see what brands are there, what the brands look like, how they're being portrayed to consumers, and really which brands are kind of filling the shelves, what type of products. You can have a look, even if you walk into, say, a Watson's in China, which is I suppose a pharmacy, yeah, and they sell a lot of healthcare products as well. And you walk in there, you'll start to see what type of products Chinese people are purchasing just by what's on the shelves. You'll start to notice things like lots of skincare products will have whitening agents in them, and because Chinese people are always pursuing a whiter complexion. So things like that, you start to get a feel for what type of products they're buying and what brands are doing well in the Chinese market. Similarly, you'll be able to chat with people in China and start to get a feel for what Chinese people are after, what their aspirations are like, see their daily lives, see what they do have in their homes and what they don't have. Being over there is definitely the fastest way to find out.
Yeah, and I always find it amazing how many small business owners are developing a China strategy. They've never actually spent much time in the China market. I agree, getting on the ground, seeing what's going on must be, and feeling the vibe must be the best way to do that. Scott, you go to China a lot. What do you think?
I agree with that entirely, because my perception of China, studying it for a long time from work beforehand, was completely different to when I arrived. And I first visited China probably 2.5 years ago. I've been back about 8 times since, all sorts of different cities. And you that first visit, you start to get the vibe for it, you get to know the people, the restaurants, the shops, and your perspective changes completely, I think. And not just, obviously Beijing, Shanghai, and we'll talk a bit about that later on, but going around to the other cities as well to get their different personalities, to see, I would say just get yourself in the zone of really where your product needs to be so that you can better picture what you want to do with it.
Yeah. So how do we start researching the market? So we've been to China, we've felt the vibe, we've seen lots of things happening. Now how do we go a bit deeper and start getting some real research that we can rely on to develop a business strategy? Where would you start?
Look, there's a number of ways. I mean, you can do your own research, or you can work with people that professionally conduct research. Now, it can be fairly expensive, and you may not get kind of the exact kind of nuanced responses that you want if you just do surveys or go through market research kind of agency. They can end up taking a lot of money and you may not get really good advice. I think a great way to really get good insights is to speak with Chinese people in your home country or in China, start to get a feel for what direction, and then start to kind of, I suppose, follow those hunches and see if they're backed up. It's probably, I find it is a better way than, say, surveying thousands of people and then trying to analyze the data and hoping that it's going to give you a good response. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the Chinese market is very different. So pick pick an area. If you find that there's an opportunity in a certain province or a certain city in China, start to conduct more research on the ground in that area rather than, say, taking China as a whole. If you've got a product which targets women, or particularly pregnant women, for example, then you would obviously drill in on that particular demographic and person and the city that you may be trying to launch your product into. Social media is a great way to gather information on what trends are out there, what people are talking about. Social media, I mean, a lot of people in the West may think that China doesn't have social media. They don't have access to Facebook in China, but they have certainly got their own social media, WeChat and Weibo, and I'm sure perhaps the viewers have heard about some of these in previous episodes. But really, it's important to know that there are important discussions around products and brands online, and a lot of inspiration for purchases on e-commerce come from or originate from discussions or people promoting things that they'd recently purchased themselves. So tapping into that and looking at what people are talking about and promoting to their friends will give you a good idea of what they want to buy.
Yeah.
David, I think there's also a lot of free information out there already. The AFGC has a lot of information on various products to be exported to China. There's a lot of reports. There's the e-commerce report Austrade has put in. So I think, just Googling around in Australia, you'll find quite a wealth of information to begin with, and it gets you a big head start. And then I would just add, and there's a lot of the trade offices or Austrade, they really are much more helpful than people think. If they haven't reached out to them before, they can really give some great information to get you started. So I think absolutely agree with what Greg said about doing your own research, but I think there's also a lot of existing material out there that you can start with, and also people to just pick up the phone. I think you'd be surprised at how much you can get for free first, and then branch out from there.
I think that's absolutely right. There's a lot more free information out there than there used to be. We used to have to rely on very basic primary research that you could just get off a shelf. These days, you're right. There's a lot more sophisticated stuff that we can access, and it's made a huge difference. So let's talk about the Chinese consumer. I often say that China isn't westernizing; it's modernizing. It's a big difference. And I think here in the West, we tend to think that they're just trying to become more like us, whereas actually that's not necessarily the case. So tell us what we know about the Chinese consumer, how they started, where they are today, where their aspirations are for the future, and how that's different to what we're used to in the Western world.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I would agree with that 100%. I think Chinese people are seeking more modernized standard of living. One that their parents didn't necessarily enjoy. I think there's probably some Western influences, and we see things like Starbucks starting up in China, and the idea of having a cafe, somewhere to sit down, is something which Chinese people want. It's about finding that kind of little oasis in the city, being able to meet up with people and having a chat. But the product looks quite different when you actually get to China. You'll see green tea lattes are one of the most popular, rather than a strong long black, which might be something more popular in New York. So the product does vary, and so they're not just trying to seek what we have in the West. There are influences of that, but it's been adapted and modified to suit the palate of the Chinese consumer. I think also it's good to appreciate that China is an Asian country, East Asian country to be more specific, and a lot of styles and I suppose influence does come from other countries like Japan and South Korea, which have been, I suppose, developed now for a number of decades. And fashion and styles and trends, even lifestyle choices, are influenced by Korean celebrities, Korean media, movies, a lot which is infiltrating into the Chinese market. So it's important to understand that there are other influences other than America and Hollywood.
Yeah. Scott? Yeah.
Well, I think from my strength is really food and agriculture, and Australia's strength there. I mean, understanding the Chinese consumer with their usually one child, they love their food. They're really into health in terms of their food, and it's important to them. And given the scares in China are about food safety, I mean, understanding that really that opportunity for clean, safe food from Australia. Is a key driver of middle class and above Chinese consumers. So I think it's one attribute that is very particular to China, and really other parts of Asia as well, but really very strongly drives Chinese buying behaviour for the middle class and above.
And I think it's worth saying that the nuclear Chinese family is quite different to the Western equivalent. So you've got, maybe 4 grandparents in their 60s who grew up in the Cultural Revolution. They were very poor, and they've really not had any money before in their lives. And now they've been successful and perhaps reached become very wealthy. They then have 2, there might under them be 2 30-year-olds, and then 1 child. So you've often got 1 child with 6 adults looking after them, 4 grandparents, 2 parents. And often the money is being spent on the child by these 6 adults, which of course means there's a whole new opportunity around education products, toys, video games and this sort of thing, which is actually directed at a much younger consumer, even though they may not be paying for it.
And in many cases, both parents working, probably much more than here, and the wife having potentially successful career as well. So that time poor element as well, I think, is increasingly going to drive their behaviour. So, that family dynamic and where they're going there is critical.
Yeah, and not all of them speak English. The grandparents might, but the children may speak some good English. The young child might actually be the best English speaker in the family. And we have to remember that when we're coming in looking to engage with Chinese consumers. They're not all looking or aspiring to a Western style of life. They're actually, it's a Chinese style of life.
Yeah, which is exactly, comes from Confucian kind of values, which as much as people might think don't kind of exist anymore, they do, and they undertone a lot of decisions, particularly like you mentioned, the focus on education, the family, those values, and career development are definitely things which are held in high regard.
Let's quickly talk about cities. We've got first-tier cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. Then second-tier cities, we talked about Hangzhou, Xi'an, Shenzhen. What about some of the differences that we see on the ground in terms of the different markets, different cities, different places you can start? And how do you go about researching that?
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest difference is that in China there was a lot of development on the East Coast, and so the emphasis was on Beijing, Shanghai, as you spoke about, and in Guangzhou, these cities were developed, and there was big kind of governmental policy focus on these cities. We've seen them mature and now become very competitive markets, quite sophisticated. They've got high-end products and savvy consumers. With the T2 cities, we're starting to see that there's a growing middle class. There's a lot more people because there's more T2 cities with kind of just booming populations as more people migrate from rural areas to these nearby cities. So we've got a lot of middle class consumers in.
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Brin, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit brin.ai or search the App Store today.